How long does it take to get a first impression of someone? 5, 6 seconds? We all rely on first impressions, but what are the stories we miss if we don't go further? What misconceptions and misunderstandings might we have if we don't go further? I have been loving Carolyn Keel's podcast, Beyond 6 Seconds. Carolyn interviews neurodivergent and disabled folks on her show, entrepreneurs, content creators, and advocates. As a neurodivergent person herself, Carolyn also shares some of her own life experiences on the show. She seems to know the exact right questions to ask to help her guests share personal stories that break down the stigma and bias around neurodiversity and disabilities. If you want to listen to stories that show the human spirit at its very best, check out Beyond 6 Seconds. You can find it anywhere you listen to podcasts and at beyond6seconds.com. Stick around to the end of the episode to hear more about Beyond 6 Seconds. The episode you're about to hear is part of our Season 2 series on family. Whether family of origin or family of choice, is your work a family affair? Welcome to another episode of Art Heals All Wounds. I'm your host, Pam Uzel. On this show, we meet artists transforming lives with their work. It's funny how something small, like the click of a pilot light, can light a flame. It's the same way with art. I'm wondering, is there something from your childhood that sparked your creative fire? When Shantre Pinkney was a little girl, her mom gave her a Fisher-Price camera. It used the type of film that clicked in, and Shantre carried this camera with her wherever she went. Her mom, who was young and single, would sometimes hire a babysitter to stay with Shantre in order to go out. Before she left, she would come into Shantre's room and say, "Here, take my picture." They would often go together to the White Plains, New York Art Center, a place where Shantre would see the Alvin Ailey dance troupe perform. Shantre's mother wrote plays and was the children's choir director in church. Watching some of her mother's plays and seeing the call and response between the minister and the congregation in church planted the seed in Shantre of the effect she wanted her creative work to have. Just like a pilot light, it might serve as an ignition that sparked discussion and desire. You're listening to Art Heals All Wounds. Listen and let us inspire you. Shantre Pinkney, a photojournalist, filmmaker, and writer living in the San Francisco Bay Area, understands the power of an image. She also understands the power of words, both spoken and written. Her work asks us to look at landscapes, in particularly the neighborhood of Bayview Hunters Point in San Francisco, and to understand it through the lens of repeated trauma. Whether it's from the brutal murder of a young Black man at the hands of the police, the precarious culture threatened by displacement, or the sudden impact of a pandemic. Shantre uses carefully crafted words to ask us to read the landscape as a site of trauma and to imagine the inner heartbreak of those affected by it. She uses the same keen vision to elevate the voices of the residents as they creatively express and address this trauma. In her latest work, Shantre is creating a book called Raw, Black, and Blue. Although it's a work of fiction, the protagonist is a photojournalist who journals as a way to understand her life, her emotions, and her psychological state. Shantre is using the photos that she's collected over time to represent the work of her protagonist. Like the spark lighting a fire, Shantre's goal is that others who engage with the book will perhaps find a bit of themselves in the photos and in the questions the protagonist works through. Raw Black and Blue goes beyond documenting trauma and asks the important question of what's next? How can we love and heal? Hi, Shantre. Thank you so much for being on this episode of Art Heals All Wounds. Before we get going, can you introduce yourself and tell us what you do?
My name is Shantre Pinkney, and I'm a filmmaker and photographer. I mostly work with artists, nonprofit organizations, supporting them.
Well, I've seen some of your work, and I'm so curious. How did you first get drawn to doing filmmaking and photography or just doing anything creative in general?
That really came from my mother. I don't think she really notices that, but growing up in New York, I grew up in this town called White Plains, which is close to the Bronx. And every Saturday, we would go out. We would venture out to the city, downtown. We frequently went to the White Plains Art Center. And generally, like every year, they would have like these Martin Luther King celebrations. So, you would have real popular artists out perform, and notably, Alvin Ailey dance troupe will be there, and we could see them for free. And we would go to plays. She would write. Besides being a choir director, I was in the children's choir. Being the choir director, she would also write church plays, and we would perform them. So a lot of her influence was from her, and watching her favorite movies too.
Well, that's amazing that you had a mom who was so creative. What drew you to photography and working with a camera specifically? Do you know?
Yeah, well, as a kid, she wanted the best for me. I mean, being a single mom, she worked hard, but I remember she gave me Fisher Price camera. It was like those rectangular size ones that you have to hold like this, and then
Yeah.
it was blue and it was soft, so if I dropped it, and it was the type of film that you had to like snap in to place in order to to take the photo. But
Right.
it was like I would carry it everywhere. And my mom was young. She was a teen mom and teenage mom. So she would wanted to have parties herself. So when I would go, she would leave me with the babysitter. Before she would go, she would tell me, "Here, take the camera, take my picture." And so I'll be taking out the snot and eye boogers out of my eyes, and then but just frame it and take her photo.
Because you were crying because you didn't want her to leave?
Well, she woke me out of sleep, take my picture, basically. But yeah, I mean, it didn't, it didn't bother me. I enjoyed that. I didn't really realize that was an outlet for me. Writing, journaling was an outlet for me. I had a amazing fourth and fifth grade teachers that really inspired me to write. Visually pairing, the camera, seeing what an image looks like in the frame, and then thinking about a story, and then writing those stories out. I remember even having these ideas about thinking of a soap opera between the alphabet. I would characterize each letter, in kindergarten, A, B. B was a bad boy, and A was like this sophisticated woman, but she was attracted to B, to the letter B, and then you had C was like just stuck up, and then you had D. It was just like this. It was like a soap opera because one of my other family members was heavy into soap opera watching. So my mind was just always going, always thinking and visualizing. So getting things out on page was just like so essential, especially being a quiet person. My mom was very, very outgoing. She's a party person, but I was very quiet and reserved. But this was just my outlet. Being an only child in my mom's home too.
Well, that's interesting because I love that you're bringing up that point that that was your way. I mean, there's so many ways to express yourself that don't have to do with speech or the volume of your speech, and that you found this way. I truly wish. Did you keep those little soap operas with the alphabet?
I'm sure I wrote them down. I just don't know where they are, but I can, yeah, pull up like a character description and write them all down from A to Z. So
That's hilarious.
I probably should get back to that seriously.
There's a good children's book in there somewhere.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
Well, so speaking of books, I know you mostly for your photography and your film work, but it sounds like you're working now in the medium of, well, in writing. And when we talked the last time, you said that you were revisiting a story, but you were revising it in a way. And I'm wondering if you could, for your new project, Raw, Black, and Blue, and I'm wondering if you can talk about that, like a little bit of the background, why a different medium, why you're revising it. What is it that you're working through in this new version?
Well, I gotta say too, just getting back to writing, like I was writing for some time and then, things happen, you're working a lot or even when you're in study mode, like you put that passion, you gotta be careful about putting aside the things that you really care about. There were things that I needed to get back to in writing. And where the book came from, revisiting that was when I was in film school, I did a thesis film called The Raw. And it was a short, like 10-minute film. And at the time, I was living and working in Bayview, Hunters Point. It was like the cheapest district in San Francisco that I could find to live in when I moved up here from LA. And thankfully, finding a work in Bayview as well, working with youth, 10-year-olds, fifth graders. And it was after school program. Our organization also connected with this other program that like would cater or connect with family members who lost loved ones either due to gang violence or drugs or just basically dealing with mental health issues.
Mm-hmm.
So I was just hearing their stories when I was connecting with the staff members, and I was just really blown away. And being in that environment, being affected by the environment there, by my neighbors dealing with death, and yeah, it was very like it was empathetic. And it bothered me. Some things didn't really bother me as much, and that's where the writing came in. Because of hearing about death so much and hearing gunshots at the time so much, the writing came to be as like a way of healing and processing instead of building like this wall, making sure my heart wasn't hard to the things that I needed to confront and the people that I could help, in some way, assist in some way, pray for. The writing was something that really helped me. I needed that as an outlet. So I started writing this short from a male point of view, someone who was working in that environment and attending to cases or a case involving, a death of someone in the neighborhood and how they adjusted to that, how they worked through that, and their relationships with the people that they're working with. The book came about. I wanted to do a long version of it, but a feature version of it. And then for years, like I put it away because I was like, if something didn't feel right, I felt like I was forcing it. And I was like, I'd rather do something fun, not so down. But after years passed, like I realized this is something I really need to go back to because it kept eating at me. So, but to make it more real for myself, a friend actually challenged me. Luna, I don't know if you're watching, but she really challenged me about why are you focusing on the male point of view? Well, there's nothing wrong with that. But I think in terms of I needed to dig a little bit deeper into what I wanted to get at in terms of the essence of the story. And I need to understand, I guess, for myself, I put it as a woman's point of view, a Black woman's point of view. And, I didn't know anything about or worked directly as like a crisis response team member, which is who the staff members I was working with did. I was like, well, I'll write from a perspective that I know of. So as a photographer, as an artist who cares for the people that she's interacting with. So like I can write from that. And it felt genuine, it felt right. And I can it was like this I don't know, those kind of toys where you pull and you could shape and stuff like that. Like you can, I don't know what you call that, but you can pull it and make it in different shapes and sizes and but like clay in a sense. But
Right.
some ones that you can kind of snap back into place. But I could play with it and I could mold it in a sense and kind of understand some areas, not only for the people that I'm writing it about, but for myself to heal in areas, to let go in some areas. Yeah. I said, if that all makes sense.
It does make sense. Yeah. Well, I'm wondering, so what is the name of the central character whose perspective you're writing from in this book?
Oh, I named her Tamia.
Tamia?
Yeah.
Well, what is the primary conflict for Tamia that you're working through?
Well, her conflict is based on her involvement with the environment, revolving around characters who are dealing with trauma. So, from her perspective, it's her dealing with her past, being from the neighborhood, and connecting with a love interest who was also a crisis response member, and wondering how she can navigate a relationship while still dealing with trauma, while going through her healing process, in a sense.
Hmm.
And it's through journals, through her own journals, and through her own photography. And some written just for herself, and some written to her love interest.
It's interesting because it's like layers, because you're writing this thing about a protagonist who is herself using a creative outlet to work through something,
Right.
which I really,
Right.
no, I love that. I love that. And I'm so curious. Do you think that her approach is working for her? Or do you know yet? I don't know how far along you are in the book.
Yeah, I believe it does. I think even so, as we writers, like we write something that characters like our baby, and then we have to see it kind of like make its own decisions and walk and let it fall and then get hurt, but then get back up again. I know some even there would be even more changes or maybe another version of choices or decisions she makes.
I like that because sometimes I feel like there's a message that comes through that unless you are whole, you can't be in a relationship. And I wonder about that because we're like, what does that even mean to be whole? We're constantly evolving, growing, healing. And does that mean that, I mean, where do we get to that point where we're whole and we'll be in a relationship? Or is the point more to just continue our own healing process, but try and do that while in relationship with someone else? So I like that idea in your book that we all come to relationships with maybe past traumas, healing things that need to happen. And that doesn't mean that we're not yet relationship ready. It might, but not always.
Right, exactly. When I was writing from the male point of view, it was taken from some of the folks that I was working with, hearing their stories, like they would joke about certain things. Some things that are off the wall, like, I could tell it was from a place that they wanted to, I kind of step out of that like seriousness mode that they were generally in for so many hours of the day.
Mm-hmm.
And I was always thinking, like, how are their relationships with their folks, so with themselves, with their kids, with significant others, like how that played out. And yeah, it was just like this teamwork in a sense. When they would tell me about like going to retreats, they would do certain retreats to kind of have this release or process thing where they would journal themselves. One of the things that they would do too.
Yeah. Well, I'm just thinking about now, based on what you're saying, this idea of compartmentalizing a little bit and using humor. I mean, sometimes we have to do that to stay sane,
Right.
to
Right.
stay in our lives, whatever that might be. And as long as we recognize, like, okay, I've put this heavy thing down over here, I remember where it is, and I am going to go pick it up later, but right now I need to make a joke or I need to just step out of that. And that's so interesting just to think about. I think there are a lot of things that are prescribed as that you can't do, but in fact, they're very good survival strategies as long as you're aware of them, of what you're doing.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I want to get back to your process a little bit because you made a podcast called The Red Lounge, READ, which I really like. You have a great podcasting voice, first of all. And also, you read aloud excerpts from the book or from the work in progress. And it's so pleasurable to be read aloud to, I think. And I'm curious about two things. How do you choose which section you're going to read aloud on the podcast? And then secondly, has this process been helpful to you in writing this book?
Well, I was just going from the actual beginning where to me, I would actually start writing. And I wanted first to have an introduction to her and then start from where she would start introducing herself, or in a sense, starting in her journal, like where she would start on that first page and writing what would come to mind and then go from there. So I just wanted to do that in that timeline space, straight up exactly what her concern is, conflict is, and then continue on through her thought process. Basically, I created the contents, like the table of contents, these mini chapters, and I just put them in order to start and broke them down by the theme, raw, black, blue, and start from there. The process doing this through audio storytelling, it's been very essential to like the process of writing, process of even rethinking things, thinking language and the tone, just making sure that I even have her tone, the tone of the characters right. When I listen back to it now, some things I pull out, I'm like, oh, I should change that. I should change that, the turn, a certain word. Oh wait, that part doesn't make sense. Oh wait, that's great, but no, I love this to hear more about that, like flesh out more from that point of view. And some from the podcast. In the book version, it's a bit longer. It's a lot longer because I felt like I had to pull out more. And yeah, then putting myself through an audio storytelling, like on the podcast, was very new for me. Maybe to put myself out there. Yeah, most folks, when they record, don't particularly like their voice. I like my voice now, but before I had to, work myself up to that.
Yeah, I completely get that. I'm so used to hearing myself recorded now, but it used to make me cringe. But I like that result, that it's like I've made friends with how my voice sounds recorded. Yeah. Yeah. And you can't be objective about your own voice because you do have a great voice for podcasting or however you would choose to use it. It's both engaging but soothing. So, and the other thing I wanted to ask you about, I think you told me that the book will include photos. Is that true, or did I make that up?
No, yeah, that's right. Yeah. It's a photo book. It's a fictional love story or beginning of a love story, but it's a photo book. I try not to have any type of stage images. Like I try to at least keep some images that are a doc style that I've taken over, the course of years from her perspective, from Jamia's perspective. But that's what it is, a photo book, a fictional photo book.
Yeah, well, you've done amazing photographs, especially of, if I'm remembering correctly, people in Bayview, Hunters Point.
Yeah.
Can I read something from your website?
Oh, yes. Thank you. Yeah.
So, in speaking about your work, you'd said that I seek to raise dialogue between art and audience. And I'm curious to know a little bit more about how you want to see that happen and really even what that means for you.
Yeah, that brings me back to, as a kid growing up in New York and White Plains, that there was always this cause and effect with art, with my teachers, a project, with my mom, there was this connection, I saw that I grabbed hold of. I saw the power in it. There was something that Gordon Parks said, and he said that, the camera is a weapon, that it was his weapon, a weapon of choice, a choice of weapons. Just one of my favorite books, by the way. Definitely check that out. A Choice of Weapons. And he said that weapon of the camera was a way to eradicate or show the effects of racism, poverty, amongst folks of color, Black folks. And with art, I saw the impact that my mom's plays had on us as a kid. the call and response in church. Like, I know if you, like the call and response in church,
Yes.
we have that. There's like this interaction between, song, the word that the pastor is releasing, and then you have the congregation respond to that or repeat exactly that. You have, when we went to go see Alvin Ailey, it was like this, there was the tribute scene in Alvin Ailey. You YouTube it, you'll find it. These colorful dresses and outfits and people cheering. It was a tribute dance. And then you had the crowd interacting with, smiling and clapping, to the beat and to the rhythm. But that's the same thing that, what we do with, whether we're doing spoken word, whether we're writing. For this book, I wanted to be like a walkable gallery in a sense, like something that people can really touch and hold and maybe see themselves in, see a relative in, see someone, a loved one in. And then there's also having that like panel discussions about whatever the topic is being addressed in it, that on a serious note, like maybe on a health panel or science panel, mental health panel, that could be shared and people can address those things or get some type of support. Some of these characters in the book are dealing with mental health issues. And it's like a spark, like a pilot light. It's small, but then it, there's this ignition, like it just fires consistently. That's my goal, my desire for whatever I put my hands to, anything I create, that I want that to spark and desire in other people.
I just love this idea of sparking desire. That's a really beautiful idea and a great aspiration for any creative work that you put out there. Well, Shantre, can you let people know what's next for you and also where they can find out about you and your work?
Yeah. Well, what's next right now? I'm just, putting out the final touches of the book. I hope to have that ready, next year, spring. Yeah, in the spring. And then I have a fiscal sponsor for the project, and that information can be found as well as, other projects that I work on my website at shantre.com. That's SHANTRE.com.
Okay. And if you start any kind of fundraising, like a Kickstarter or anything like that, I don't know if you have plans to do that, but it would be great if you could share that with me. And, at some point, even if it's after the podcast has aired, we could let people know as well. I'd be happy to help you in whatever way that I could. But yeah.
Yeah, that would be awesome.
Yeah, I'm excited about the book, and I do really like your work, and I love the intention behind your work as well.
Thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate this. I think just having these conversations has been so enlightening. Like it's very nutritious. I really appreciate all the work you're doing and the people that you're connecting with for the arts community as a whole. Like this is huge.
Thank you.
Yeah, it really is huge.
Well, thank you. I'm glad that you were willing to be a part of it and share your story and your work.
I appreciate it. Thank you for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure.
You're listening to Art Heals All Wounds. I'm so grateful that Shantre Pinkney shared her new book, Raw, Black, and Blue, with us on this episode of Art Heals All Wounds. If you'd like to hear about the progress of Shantre's book, you can find out more info and contact her through her website, shantre.com. That's SHANTRE.com. You can also Google her and you'll find some of her writing in other locations on the web. The music you've heard in this podcast is Yellow Light District by Lobo Loco. Beethoven's Piano Sonata No. 15 in D major was performed by Karina Galanian. The two additional pieces of music used in the intro were by Remus and Ketsa. This podcast was edited by Eva Hristova. thank you for listening to this episode of Art Heals All Wounds. Did you know that we're easy to keep in touch with? If you go to the website arthealsallwoundspodcast.com, you can find more information about the show, and you can sign up for our newsletter and get other contact information there. I love feedback on both the show and the newsletter, and I'm always excited to hear about your healing journeys through art.
First impressions can take as little as 6 seconds to make. In a world where things just seem to be speeding up, how do we slow down enough to get past that narrow 6-second window and really learn about each other? In our society's rush to consume information as quickly as possible, whose amazing and unique stories don't we get to hear? That's where the Beyond 6 Seconds podcast comes in. Join me, Carolyn Keel, as I uncover stories of life and creativity, triumph and struggle, with a focus on neurodiversity. Starting in 2022, I'm featuring neurodivergent guests on my show, including those who are autistic, dyslexic, dyspraxic, have ADHD, Tourette syndrome, and more. Their stories of entrepreneurship, creativity, and advocacy will shatter misconceptions, break stigma, and showcase the vibrance and diversity of this community. And, as a neurodivergent person myself, I'll be sharing my own story as well. To listen, go to beyond6seconds.net or follow the show in your favorite podcast player.